Clara Ribeiro was merely the cleaning lady's daughter, invisible, drowning in debt, desperately clinging to her dignity in a city that had given her nothing. But in a single fated day, Clara was thrust into the orbit of David Albright, Belo Horizonte's most arrogant and formidable millionaire. He cornered her with an outrageous proposition, a loveless marriage in exchange for her family's salvation. What he couldn't have known was that this broken woman would turn his entire world upside down. The public hospital hallway buzzed with shouts, sirens, and the choking scent of disinfectant. Clara gripped her unconscious mother's hand on the gurney as the doctor murmured, "Exhaustion, physical and emotional burnout. That's what happened when a 62-year-old woman cleaned offices into the early hours to pay off debts that weren't hers. That's when two men in sharp suits approached. Ms. Clara Ribeiro," she turned, her eyes red from weeping. "Mr. David Albright demands your presence. Now." "Demands?" she stammered, bewildered. "Who?" The answer came hours later in a glass-walled office high atop the Albright Tower. A panoramic view of the city stretched out before them. Leather armchairs. And in the center him, David. Impeccable, unapproachable. "Your fiancée vanished with $500,000 using your name." He laced his fingers, a sneer playing on his lips. "And since the debt is now yours, you have two options. Either marry me for a year, or watch your mother lose everything." Clara Ribeiro learned to survive long before she learned to dream. Raised in the back rooms of a public school, where her mother, Mrs. Elena, cleaned classrooms from 5 in the morning, Clara grew up hearing she needed to be twice as good to be half noticed, and she tried. With thread, scissors, and an old sewing machine inherited from her grandmother, she set up her small atelier in the Villa Santa Cruz neighborhood. She made party dresses for neighbors, school uniforms, church curtains, everything with care, everything with sacrifice. Then came Mark, the easy smile, the sweet words, the perfect plan to open a clothing factory together. Clara signed papers, trusting in love, and woke up months later with her name ruined, her business registration blocked, and a $500,000 debt. At the police station they said he had fled, and that she, legally, was responsible for everything. That's when Mrs. Elena collapsed, a nervous breakdown in the cafeteria of the very building where she cleaned bathrooms. David Albright's building, the man who now stared at her with absolute coldness. "Marry me, Clara," he said, unblinking. "It's just for show. 1 year. My grandmother wants to see me married so she won't cut my shares in the company, and I need to maintain control." She faced this man who seemed plucked from a corporate villain movie. Tailored suit, a clinical gaze, a voice that didn't tremble even when condemning someone. "You think you can buy anything, don't you? With the exception of death." "Yes," he replied. Clara swallowed hard. She remembered the overdue rent, her mother in the hospital, the humiliation of hearing that everything she built had turned to dust. "If I accept, I want something in return." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of demand could come from someone in your position?" She didn't hesitate. "You'll fund a training center for seamstresses from the periphery, with classes, a daycare, real infrastructure." For the first time, David was silent. Then he smiled, with mockery. "Brave or foolish, but interesting." He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" She took a deep breath. 1 year beside a man who scorned everything she was. A sham marriage, but a chance to save her mother and other women like her. Clara shook his hand. "We have a deal. But don't expect me to smile for your photos." Clara didn't crave fame or luxury or gossip magazines. All she wanted was to start fresh, clear her name, see her mother live with dignity, and perhaps one day reopen her atelier without having to hide bills. The agreement with David was a cage, yes, but also a bridge. If she held firm for a year, she would emerge on the other side with the power to rebuild her life and to change others. Only nothing prepared her for what was to come. The day after the silent yes she gave in the glass office, Clara was transported into David Albright's universe. The penthouse in Savassi had 3 floors, 5 staff members, a personal assistant, Vera, who looked at her as if she were an insect, and a meticulously scheduled routine of public appearances. First mission, dinner at the Albright mansion to introduce the fiancé to the family core. Mrs. Yolanda, David's imposing grandmother, would be the hostess. "She doesn't like surprises," Vera warned, adjusting Clara's necklace, "so try to appear less you." Clara ignored her. Dressed in a rented gown, Vera's choice, she moved through the mansion's gilded halls like someone walking through a minefield. "Clara, is it?" David's sister asked with a sharp smile. "Simple name. Where are you from again?" "Villa Santa Cruz," Clara replied firmly. "Oh, the periphery. How exotic." The muffled laughter landed like invisible punches. David, for his part, merely observed, distant, as if it were all part of a grand play he directed, but refused to act in. At dessert, Mrs. Yolanda, seated at the head of the table, raised her eyes. "And tell me, girl, what exactly led my grandson to choose you?" Silence. Everyone expected a sweet answer. Clara, however, wasn't there to flatter anyone. "Perhaps because I don't need him," she said, her voice calm. "Perhaps because, unlike you, I see what he tries to hide." The room froze. Later, alone in one of the mansion's bedrooms, Clara stared at the hand-painted ceiling. She didn't cry, but her chest felt tight, as if she were outside her own body. She had fought for respect and received scorn. And yet, part of her insisted it was worth it, even with the humiliation, even with the disdain, even with David's empty gaze, as if she were just another piece on his control board. That night, alone in a golden castle, Clara made a promise to herself, "No one will silence me again." But what she didn't yet know was that the real emotional blow was still to come. The following days dragged on like an internal winter. Clara played her part with discipline. She wore the clothes Vera chose, smiled for photos when necessary, and rehearsed answers for interviews she didn't even want to give. Each morning, a new schedule. Each night, the same emptiness. David remained impassive, polite, cold, efficient. At events, he would place a hand on her back as if moving a chess piece. Sometimes he'd utter rehearsed phrases like, "We're very happy," or "Our connection was immediate," always with that same marketing smile. But when the lights went out, they barely exchanged a word, and Clara felt that as a daily slap. She was there to pay a debt. She knew that. But nothing prepared her heart for being so completely ignored. In the 3rd week, the press discovered part of the truth. A celebrity columnist released a venomous note. "David Albright, mysteriously smitten with a bankrupt seamstress. Has anyone checked her background?" The same day, her mother, hospitalized again with chest pains, called crying, "Daughter, why do they talk about you like you're trash?" Clara had to swallow her tears and reply, "Because they don't know us, Mom. But they will." Meanwhile, the social project she had fought so hard to include in the contract dragged on. The promise of a center for seamstresses got lost amidst bureaucracies created by David's own team. "This is just for show," Vera said without ceremony. "You weren't actually supposed to get involved." It was as if everything had been a grand trap, and what hurt most was that she herself had shaken the hand that dragged her into it. That night, Clara went down to the mansion's garden, alone, without heels, without makeup, barefoot on the wet grass. She needed to breathe, to think, to escape. That's when she heard it. "She's useful, that's all," a male voice said from behind the glass wall. It was David, talking to one of the company executives, unaware Clara was on the other side, in the darkness. "This marriage story is just to keep the board quiet until the shares transfer. After that, she disappears. Just keep up appearances for a few more months." The air left Clara's chest, as if someone had pulled every thread from her soul. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply returned to her room, locked the door, and stared at her reflection in the mirror for long minutes. She wondered how she had gotten there. how she had allowed the pain of the initial abandonment to transform into silent submission. In the early hours, unable to sleep, Clara turned on her notebook and began researching NGOs, social projects, popular funding lines. Alone, without David's millions, without expecting anything more from him, she knew what was coming next. She knew that in the theatre of lies, the third act was always the unmasking. And yet, something inside her still hoped for a gesture, a word, a look, something that would show that man had a heart. But nothing came, and it was in that silence that she understood. She wasn't a fake wife, nor a victim. She was a used woman, and disposable. And yet, a seed of strength sprouted within, a strength born precisely from pain. Have you ever felt like someone only sought you out when they needed you? That inside you screamed, but on the outside, you smiled to keep everything afloat? If so, comment with, "I know how that feels." It's our way of connecting here in the comments, heart to heart. 2 days later, Clara boarded a crowded bus bound for the far north of the city. She wanted to see with her own eyes what didn't yet exist. The land where, theoretically, the training center she demanded in the agreement would operate. The address was in the contract. But upon getting off on a dirt road, all she found was an abandoned warehouse with cracked walls and weeds covering the windows. She stood there for a while, motionless, until she heard a voice. "Are you going to open that place?" Clara turned. It was a teenage girl, about 13, in a torn t-shirt, a notebook in her hand. "I don't know," Clara answered sincerely, "but I wish I could. My mum knows how to sew," the girl said. "If there's a course, she'll come, and she'll bring me too. I want to learn." The girl smiled and ran off. Clara remained there, her eyes welling up and her heart pounding. This was it. This was why. Even being used, even being ridiculed, even being invisible in David's world. There before that girl, she was someone. On her way back home, Clara didn't cry. She acted. She gathered documents, called an NGO she knew from her atelier days, asked for help drafting a new project with real impact. And at night, in silence, she left a printed copy at the door of David's office. No note, no demands. The next day she woke up lighter, still wounded, yes, but more whole than in recent weeks. And for the first time since everything began, she didn't think of running away. She thought of planting seeds, even if she was alone. She didn't know if he would care, but for the first time, she didn't need him to care. She just needed to do what was right. The next morning, when Clara came down for coffee, a rarity in recent days, she found the table set. Fresh fruit, warm cheese bread, and a steaming pot of coffee. But what surprised her most was seeing David, sleeves rolled up, serving his own coffee. No suit. No pretense. "Did Vera travel?" Clara asked, trying to maintain her sarcasm. "I gave the team the day off," he replied, without looking up from his newspaper. Silence. She almost turned her back. But before she took the first step, he spoke. "I read your project." Clara turned slowly, her heart racing. "And?" "It's good." She didn't respond. "Good. And daring," he continued. "But if you really want to make this work, you'll need more structure, planning, management." "I know," she said. "I just don't know if I have anyone to teach me." David stared at her for a moment. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., meeting room 5, I'll introduce you to the social impact team at Albright Urban Development. If you want to learn, I can open the door." Clara frowned, suspicious. "Why?" "Because you're forcing me to see value in things I ignored, and that is unsettling, but necessary." She didn't answer. She just nodded. The next day, there she was, with her old binder, a pencil behind her ear, and a sharp gaze. David observed from a distance. He saw how she took notes on everything, asked intelligent questions, confidently challenged spreadsheets. Something in him began to yield. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was admiration, and that for a man like him was dangerous. That night, as Clara organized papers in the mansion's makeshift office, She found a hidden box at the back of a cabinet. Inside, old newspaper clippings, yellowed letters, and a photo of young David hugging a smiling man with a laborer's face. On the back of the photo, scrawled in childish handwriting, "My hero, Dad." She carefully put the box away. Hours later, already in bed, she heard footsteps in the hallway. The door opened without warning. It was David, his gaze strange, his face tired. "Do you think you'll understand me by rummaging through things that aren't yours?" "I thought they were forgotten memories, not secrets." He entered, sat in the armchair in the corner. "My father built all of this. Started as a bricklayer, worked until he died," he said softly. "When he was gone, I swore I'd never depend on anyone. Not on emotion, not on love." "And did it work?" Clara asked. "Until you." The silence between them was almost palpable. "David, I don't want to save you. I know, but I'm not going to be your piece on the board either. Either you give me space to walk beside you, or I walk alone." He slowly stood up. "I'm scared," he confessed. "Of what?" "That if I open up, you'll leave. And if you don't open up, you're already gone." David paused at the door. Before leaving, he murmured, "Tomorrow, I'll take you to see my father's house. No one else has been in there since he died, but I think you deserve to see it." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't victory, it was a beginning. David's father's house was on a simple street in the East Zone, far from skyscrapers and spotlights. It was small, but well maintained. Exposed bricks, a jabuticaba tree in the backyard, and a rusty bicycle leaning against the wall. Clara looked around with a strange sense of déjà vu. That place was more like her world than his. David slowly opened the door, like someone entering an older time. "My grandmother keeps everything clean, but no one has lived here since he passed." Clara walked slowly through the rooms. On the shelf, engineering books. In the closet, simple shirts neatly folded. "He built this house with his own hands," David said, almost a whisper. "Every wall, every detail. And he used to say he had only one wish, that I would be a man of value." She looked at him, unhurriedly. "And do you think he'd be proud?" He hesitated. "For many years, no." Clara touched a wall, feeling the rough texture of the plaster. "Then perhaps there's still time." David approached. "I didn't bring you here because of the house. I brought you because I need to ask you something I've never asked anyone." "What?" He took a deep breath, like someone about to jump. "Give me a chance. A real one. Not as part of a contract, as someone trying to relearn what it means to love." She looked at him in silence, and before she could answer, his cell phone vibrated. "Once, twice, 3 times. He answered. His face went pale in seconds. "What?" he said. "What do you mean, collapse?" Clara felt a chill. "Where?" "At the construction site in New Lima. One of the buildings, part of the structure gave way. 3 workers injured. When he hung up, he seemed made of stone." "I have to go." "Go," Clara said, but don't go alone." She got into the car with him. On the way, she learned the details. The building was part of a project managed by Jackson, David's right-hand man. The same man who'd been signing contracts for years on behalf of the company. They used low-quality material to save money. "And you knew?" "No, but it's still my fault, because I let the system run on autopilot." They arrived at the site. Ambulances, shouts, reporters. David stepped out without security, without his jacket, without a shield. He went to the injured workers. He apologized, looked them in the eyes, promised to cover everything. Clara watched from a distance, and there, in that chaos, she saw the man he could be. Not the arrogant one, not the untouchable one, but the man who at last understood that building something real required cracks. Hours later, back at the company headquarters, shareholders were meeting to demand David's resignation. Exhausted, he considered accepting. "If I leave, maybe they'll save the company's reputation." "But what about its essence?" Clara said firmly. "Who will truly rebuild this if not you?" He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "And you? Will you stay? If it means walking by your side." "Yes." David took a deep breath. "Then we'll do this our way." The next day, live on TV, David Albright issued a public apology. He admitted the failure and announced the biggest restructuring in the company's history, the dismissal of all involved directors, the creation of a transparency corps, and an emergency fund for affected families. Clara stood beside him, without makeup, without rehearsal, just present. And in that moment, the most powerful and formerly most feared man in the city bowed not to scandal, but to the love that at last began to blossom. 3 months later, the scene was completely transformed. In the former abandoned area of Villa Santa Cruz, there was now a renovated warehouse with colorful signs on the facade, Clara's Stitch House. Inside, sewing machines aligned, fabric carefully stacked, the scent of fresh coffee, and voices, many voices, women learning, conversing, teaching, girls watching with bright eyes. In the corner, Mrs. Elena, in an apron, smiling, organizing spools of thread as if they were gold. And there, between an explanation about hems and a hug for someone crying for no apparent reason, was Clara, no longer the used woman, but the woman who transformed pain into a tool. David appeared at the gate, carrying 2 boxes, jeans, shirt sleeves rolled up, and a lighter way of walking, like someone who finally inhabited his own skin. "I brought the material for the Sustainable Design Hub," he said, placing the boxes on the ground, "and the first shipment of fabrics from the partnership with the refugees." Clara smiled, approached slowly. "And the board, did they accept the new action plan?" "After a lot of yelling, yes," he replied. "But only because my grandmother sent a 4-minute audio calling the directors cowards." Clara laughed. David was silent for a moment. Then he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "It's the blueprint for the house my father wanted to build in Carmine Hills, the one he drew before he died." Clara carefully opened the paper. It was simple, but beautiful. A 2-story house surrounded by trees, with a porch and a garden. "I want to build it with you," he said. "A space that's just ours. No Albrights, no masks." She looked at him and just nodded. They didn't say, "I love you," they didn't need to. Love was in the gesture of support, in the silent presence, in the respect for each other's story. As the sun shone through the windows of the sewing center and the voices of women echoed through the hall, Clara took his hand. "I never thought the worst decision of my life would bring me here." "Me neither," he whispered, but there they were, in the place where everything began, and now was reborn. David always believed power lay in controlling everything. People, businesses, emotions. Clara, on the other hand, believed she had no power, until she was forced to fight for the little she had. But it was in the improbable meeting of these 2 worlds that both discovered the simplest and most difficult truth, that someone's true worth isn't in what they possess, but in what they choose to do when no one believes in them. Clara didn't save David with pretty speeches. She challenged him with silence, confronted him with truth, and taught him by example. And he, accustomed to coldly swallowing everything, found himself forced to feel, to lose in order to gain, to fall to finally grow. It was a forced marriage, a cold contract, an agreement of convenience, but within it, something impossible to foresee was born. Because sometimes the deepest bonds emerge from the most improbable encounters. And love, when it's real, doesn't need to be announced. It reveals itself in care, in surrender, and most importantly, in the courage to change. And you? Have you ever felt used, invisible, or too small to make a difference? This story is to remind you, the world may underestimate you, but never ever underestimate what happens when you decide to keep going, even when hurt, even when discredited, even when alone. The strongest flower doesn't bloom in a crystal vase. It blooms in the crack of concrete, and it blossoms, even if no one is watching. If this story moved you in any way, leave a like below. It's the simplest way to say, it was worth telling this. Now tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? Seriously, I read everything, and I make a point of replying to those who take a moment to comment. If you believe in the power of stories like this, subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started, and every new subscription is the fuel that keeps this journey alive. And hey, don't go yet. Choose one of the 2 stories on the screen and stay with us. I'll see you in the next video.